Hello, good afternoon or good evening. It's great to have so many people from around the country registered to join us today. My name is John McInerney. I'm the director of the Sachs Program for Arts Innovation, the host for today's conversation. I just want to take a couple of minutes to tell you about the Sachs program before we start. At Sachs, our mission is to support and inspire creative practice at Penn. As you will hear from our speakers today, the arts are a key resource for addressing the world's greatest challenges. From climate change to structural racism to the wellness and health of Penn students, the arts can be a creative catalyst, bringing people together physically and culturally, highlighting our shared stories and forming connections that can transcend our differences. At Sachs, we advance that work by providing catalytic grants across the Penn community, providing resources to students, faculty, staff, and alumni. We are particularly focused on engaging students and supporting their academic pursuits in the arts while exposing them to the wider community of artistic practice in Philadelphia and beyond. We also advocate for greater integration of the arts into the university's larger strategic priorities, aligning the arts with the Penn Compact's focus on inclusion, innovation, and impact. Which brings us to the topic today. I'm honored to be able to kick off this event entitled Expanding the Commons, Art, Performance, and Social Justice in Higher Education. Today's event will be an open dialogue between four incredibly talented and thoughtful academic and artistic leaders, all who are actively expanding the boundaries of artistic practice and collaborative structures within higher education. We're going to hear about the groundbreaking work that E. Patrick Johnson and Shannon Jackson have been able to do at their respective institutions, talk about the implications for Penn and for other universities, and imagine ways to a collective future where the arts and creativity remain central, not just to education, but to everyone's daily lives. It is our hope that this and future conversations can help us foreground discussions about how to build more robust interdisciplinary art infrastructures across the Penn campus. Before I introduce our moderators, I want to encourage you to use the Q&A function to submit questions for the panel. Feel free to also add commentary to the chat, but we will only be pulling questions from the Q&A feature. As we have limited time, we may not get to everything, but we do our best to address as many questions as possible. As you can see, we also have ASL interpreters for today's event. Thank you to Hands Up Productions for working with us today and for providing that service. We also have enabled the live transcript, and additionally, we're recording today's dialogue and are happy to share the recording following the event for anyone who would like to rewatch or share this with others. Now I'd like to introduce Deborah Thomas and Sharon Hayes. Deborah A. Thomas is the R. Gene Brownlee Professor of Anthropology and the Director of the Center for Experimental Ethnography at the University of Pennsylvania. She co-chairs the board of the Sachs Program for Arts Innovation. She is also the author of Political Life in the Wake of the Plantation, Exceptional Violence, and Modern Blackness. Deb also co-directed the documentary films Bad Friday and 4 Days in May, and was the co-curator of a multimedia installation at the Penn Museum entitled Bearing Witness, 4 Days in West Kingston. Prior to her life in the academy, she was a professional dancer with the New York-based Urban Bushwomen. Sharon Hayes is a professor of fine arts in the Weitzman School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania. She also co-chairs the board of the Sachs Program for Arts Innovation. She is an artist who uses video, performance, sound, and public sculpture to expose specific intersections between history, politics, and speech. Sharon has had solo exhibitions at Moderna Musik in Stockholm, Andrea Rosen Gallery in New York, Tanya Leighton Gallery in Berlin, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. She is a recipient of a United States Artist Fellowship in 2021, a Pew Fellowship in 2016, a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2014, and the Albert Award in Visual Arts and an anonymous Was a Woman Award, both in 2013, among many other accolades. Deb and Sharon, thank you for really driving this event. I'll now let you take the reins and introduce our two guests.
Thank you, John. We're really excited about the conversation tonight, and I want to introduce one of our participants, E. Patrick Johnson. E. Patrick Johnson is Dean of the School of Communication and Annenberg University Professor at Northwestern University. A member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, Johnson's work has greatly impacted African American studies, performance studies, and gender and sexuality studies. He is the author of several books, including Appropriating Blackness, Performance and the Politics of Authenticity, Sweet Tea, Black Gay Men of the South, and Oral History, Black Queer Southern Women, and Oral History, Honeypot, Black Southern Women Who Love Women, in addition to a number of edited and co-edited collections, essays, and plays, and also an award-winning film that's based on Sweet Tea. Sharon?
It's my pleasure to introduce Shannon Jackson. Shannon Jackson is Hadidi Professor of Rhetoric and of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies at UC Berkeley, with faculty appointments in art practice, history of art, Berkeley Center for New Media, and the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. She served as the UC Berkeley Associate Vice Chancellor for Arts and Design from 2015 to 2021, which was an inaugural position. And Jackson's books include Backstages, Essays Across Art, Performance, and Public Life, published by Northwestern University Press 2022. Public Servants, Art and the Crisis of the Common Good, co-edited with Johanna Burton and Dominic Wilston, MIT Press 2016, and Social Works, Performing Art Supporting Publics by Routledge, published in 2011. Jackson's writing has also appeared in dozens of museum catalogs, journals, blogs, and edited collections, and she has received numerous awards, including a John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship in 2015. She serves on the boards of several museums and arts organizations and is a founding board member and program director for the Kramlich Art Foundation. Patrick and Shannon, it is such a deep pleasure and honor to have you both with us today. Thank you for being here. And I think what's so exciting is sort of the spread and breadth of your practices as public intellectuals, as scholars, as programmers, and also as advocates for the arts and advocates for the arts inside of the university system. So both of you have been able to do extraordinary work inside of your institutions. And while there are great differences between the two institutions in which you make a home, there are also, I imagine, many similar challenges. And so maybe we could begin by each of you talking from your perspective about any sort of initiating insights you can share on how to be an effective advocate for the arts, and whether there are underlying strategies or sort of methods that you think cross disparate institutions or have the potential to.
Well, first, thank you for the invitation to be a part of this conversation. It's always a joy to talk about art. As an artist myself and a scholar and now an administrator, the opportunity to bring all of those parts of myself together is always interesting in terms of having a conversation about it, but also for me, fortuitous in that I've now been able to navigate all those different spaces and can have more of a 30,000 foot view of how art, scholarship, and institutions work. So again, thank you for the opportunity. I'll briefly say that I think that one of the things that cuts across all institutions relative to advocating for the arts or making sure that the arts are visible is doing a good job of having our presence be known. I now in my role as dean get to talk to a lot of alumni, particularly of my school, which a big part of the portfolio of my school is the arts. I have theater, performance studies, and radio, television, film. And that probably composes most of the arts at Northwestern. There's the art history department and the Department of Art Theory and Practice are the only other arts programs that are outside my school. Everything else is inside my school. But one of the things that the alumni have noted is that whenever they receive any kind of big email from Northwestern or go to our main page, it's something about STEM. It's not focusing on the arts. Now, everything they get from us, from the school directly, focuses on the arts, but not coming from the university itself. And part of what I see from this perch is how the administration is highlighting STEM, because that sort of seems to be the bandwagon that everyone is on. So my role in terms of advocating for the arts is to demonstrate the relationship between STEM and the arts. I have a number of faculty, for instance, in design, whether that be costume design or set design, who are already collaborating with engineers. I had a group of 2 faculty members who are costume designers collaborating with faculty in our School of Engineering on a computer software that helped our MFA designs, costume design students create 3-dimensional, basically costume designs, but they were more like sculptures that they then created and we put on display around campus. So demonstrating that, one, that the arts are not anathema to technology and other STEM disciplines, that it takes a creative mind to actually work within STEM. I can't tell you the number of industry people who are mechanical engineers, for instance, or other kinds of engineers who say they don't want engineering students in their companies. They want theater majors. They want creative writers because they need someone to think outside the box. So that's one thing. The other thing I'll say is making sure that we educate people about how art is also a form of scholarship. I often describe myself as an artist scholar or a scholar artist, and having both of those titles is really important to me when I give talks, because I want people to know that for me, those aren't mutually exclusive, that the work that I do as an artist is intellectually, theoretically informed, and that the sort of traditional scholarship that I produce is also has an aesthetic to it. And so I don't think we necessarily do a good enough job of demonstrating that to leaders and institutions. I think we could lean into that a little more because the arts, while we're the least expensive, we're also usually the last on the list of priorities. But you can get a lot more for a lot less from us.
I'll just jump in and endorse so much of what Patrick said. I'd love to follow through on some of his comments as we continue, but some of the things I was thinking about in anticipation of this dialogue was, first of all, just to say from the get-go that being an advocate for the arts means noticing and advocating for the fact that the arts are not one thing, that the arts in the performing arts, which is a lot of what Patrick described, are different from genealogies around the visual arts. They're even within film and cinema. So film and cinema is not the same as media art. And even within the performing arts, theater and dance are not the same as music. Or at least the way that they're organized as disciplines, the way that they're organized as training systems, the way that their histories are taught, often vary. Then once you also push more, also within my portfolio and charge for collaboration was the fields of design, including architecture, landscape architecture, costume design, as well as product design, and even design thinking within the business school. So within all of that, that's an incredible variety. Those are different forms and different skills. And the other thing to say about it, they sometimes need different infrastructures to teach them. Also, that they sometimes argue for themselves based on very different principles or value systems. Sometimes dependent on which art form you work with, but sometimes just based on the context or project within which one is working, people will advocate for the arts based on some different, I don't want to say competing, but not always aligned principles, such as art is about beauty. For some, art is about community and cohesion. It's about sometimes around healing and bringing people together. For sometimes people advocate for the arts as a kind of affective or emotional communication system that does a better job of communicating than certain kinds of, than other modes of information sharing. Other times, certainly from the early 20th century on, art has really been activated by its critical capacities, by its conceptual capacities, by prompting a sort of a view of the world that challenges perceived and inherited reality principles. And then finally, maybe a bit more of a 21st century mode is the discourse of creativity, which goes a lot of different directions, but it's part of what contributes to this notion of the arts as activators of, as Patrick said, out of the box thinking, or of expanding the solution set. Some of that discourse that has accompanied a certain kind of validation of creativity might align or not align with some of the others I just described. And to me, the thing is to say that no one of them is perfect or good, and no one of them is negative or bad. But none of them are silver bullets for every occasion. And so to me, the best thing about being an arts advocate, or the thing to learn about it, is to figure out how to navigate the different contexts in which one finds oneself, and to figure out how to respond to the histories and principles and values and skill sets of that domain, and also to remind them, however, in whatever small way, in the moment, in the project, that week, that hour that you're talking to people, that there is another way, that there might be another whole context in which you see yourself. And that, to use another overused word these days, to pivot as the context requires, seems really important to have a varied, complicated, multidimensional discourse of arts advocacy. So I'll start there. I'd happy to amplify more on anything more specific.
Yeah, it's really useful the way that you've described this as a really multivalent and layered field that has numerous different audiences as well. And I wonder if you could take a little bit of time to share how you put those various advocacy skills into action at your specific institutions. You know, what strategies have you found effective for speaking to those different audiences? How did you, for example, Patrick, work toward building, that which started as the Black Arts Initiative and is now called the Black Arts Consortium? How did you, Shannon, work in order to create the kind of energy around the arts that you were able to within your position? And how did you use particular strategies also to overcome obstacles? That may be similar across our institutions. Penn has a very decentralized power structure. And, how did you manage to do the kind of work you did to build what you have built at your institutions in a way that has spoken to the sort of different sectors that are active within those power structures.
I started first last time, Shannon, so why don't you go?
Me go first. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, wonderful question. First of all, the creation of my position was a long time in coming. It was based on a lot of pre-meetings, proto-consortiums, things that were called consortiums before it ended up becoming a central campus position. But it really came about from the realization that the arts domains actually belong to so many different wings of the campus and have reporting structures to so many different wings of the campus that something more central made sense. But I say along the way, one of the big things is to tap into the shared frustration of alumni, of faculty, of students, of staff, of community members who are trying to navigate a campus that they happen to know is fairly creative, that they're trying to find lectures at the art history department, and they're trying to show up for a jazz performance in music, and they're also have a sense that journalism has become very media centric lately and intermediate with a lot of intermediate experimentation. And they have a sense that we had a creative campus, but the campus itself hadn't really announced and put forward this central part of its identity. Like Patrick, and since Northwestern is, I'm an alum of Northwestern as well, Patrick may say he's at a STEM institution, but I'm really at a STEM institution, or one that's very much known and put forward, its identity is based on that, but so much of how it is touted and its awards that it wins around the world are dependent actually on reams of activity that are not only STEM related. And so it was really about tapping that, and that shared frustration came about not only from arts faculty and art students, but actually from faculty who were not primarily appointed there, who were engineers or scientists, for whom who stayed at Berkeley or chose Berkeley precisely because they didn't want to be at a STEM only school. So once the sort of news comes out, it's really interesting to find out who your allies are. There might be an ally in demography that you didn't realize cared quite so much about this kind. So you never know how much more excited people might be about activating a creative and cultural life at one's institution, or really about gathering all that's there. So a few other quick strategies that I think is important, and it seems like you are doing them. Part of it is, I think, about creating projects and initiatives that don't always increase staff labor, but take labor off of staff. Huge one. To come bearing gifts. It sounds like you guys have catalytic gift grants or whatever, to come bearing some kind of gift that incentivizes cross-unit collaboration, whether it's a grant or a shared speaker series. Another important thing to me was actually mining the history of the university and recognizing within our own history and within our own structures, we've had a pro-arts, pro-creativity history that we have intermittently claimed or foregrounded. So the first campus architect at UC Berkeley talked about Berkeley being a microcosm of a city that needs the arts. Clark Kerr, one of the most important chancellors of the university and president of the UC system, talked constantly actually about the importance of the arts in even in the multi-university context. Somewhat problematically, he talked about needing to attract scientists by showing them that they actually could have a cultural life if they came. So these little micro histories were there, and I could find them and sort of foreground them. And then another thing is also, once you start to gather the enthusiasm, you're also gathering successes and analytics on success. And so once there was an entity charged with doing that gathering, which just at Berkeley, because we don't have a dean of the arts and design, it wasn't anyone's job really to do it. But once you start adding up the awards, the jury prizes, the solo shows, the major retrospectives, the Guggenheims, the MacArthur grants, the MacArthur Geniuses that we have, you start we can put them all together across all of the art forms. And it started to provide a kind of numerical ballast for what we were trying to say. And so those were some of the things that we did and compiled in different places. And once we put together a huge grand website across the literary inclined departments, across visual art, across performing arts, across design, across media and cinema, and also acknowledged the academic units, the presenting units, and all of the student clubs, I think people could visualize something that they had the sense was always there, and now could really hang on to it and get behind it. Patrick, you want to say a bit more?
Yeah, so the Black Arts Initiative was an idea that I got when the university actually called for white papers. This is in 2011 in the silent phase of a capital campaign. And I, at that point, had been at Northwestern for over a decade, and I love collaborating with folk. And I found that while I was doing that on my own, there were so many people that I just didn't know who were working within the Black arts. And so I used the call for a white paper as an opportunity to try to break down some of the silos, both within the School of Communication, but also across the university, because I had, playmates over in the English department and in art history and art theory and practice. So I never envisioned the Black Arts Initiative as solely being within one place at Northwestern, but wanted it to reach across multiple departments and disciplines from the beginning. And the reason why we called it an initiative is because we didn't know if it was gonna last, 6 months or 6 years or whatever. And the other thing is we had no infrastructure, none. And so the administration, if you will, of the Black Arts Initiative was myself and a graduate student. And we didn't have a physical office. And the budget that we got from this white paper actually was just $150,000 in seed money from the provost's office. And the provost at that time said, we'll see what you do with this, and you can come back in 3 years, and I'll think about giving you some more money. So my goal from the start was to make sure that by the time I went back to the provost, because I knew I was going back, that the Black Arts Initiative would be so much a part of the DNA of Northwestern that I wouldn't get a no. Before I say what happened after that second ask, I should say that one of the things that was important to me was that the Black Arts Initiative wasn't built around me, that it wasn't built around one person, but around a mission and a vision. And that mission was to educate both our students at Northwestern, but also across the country and the world about the Black arts. And we had really 4 different areas that we focused on. And the first was research. We planned from the start. When I say we, it was initially a group of 12 faculty across the university. We focused on research, arts research, and we planned 3 conferences, one that focused on Chicago, one that focused on the United States, and one that focused on Black arts globally. And we also had symposiums and so on and so forth. The other thing we focused on was pedagogy. And a number of us team taught courses together, and it was a way for us to collaborate across departments and across schools, but also lean into the interdisciplinary that Northwestern said that it was, celebrating, but not necessarily always trickled down. The third thing was civic and community engagement. Because of where we sit here in Evanston, which is, it's not a faraway suburb, but sometimes if you live in the city, it can feel like it's far away, and it was hard to get people to come up here from the city. So we were deliberative about going into the community through the Black Arts Initiative. And we did that by partnering with various Black arts institutions, whether that was the DuSable Museum or the Southside Community Arts Museum, or the ETA Community Arts, which is the first Black theater here in Chicago, or Mantu Dance Company. We created those partnerships early on so that we were engaged with the community. And then the last area we focused on was practice. We didn't want to create an entity where it was just about research. We also wanted to showcase Black art, in practice. Not everybody who was a faculty member is a practitioner, but everyone was invested in practice. So sometimes that would be inviting visual artists or performing artists to campus. Sometimes it would be about us producing a show on campus, but we wanted to make sure that all of those things were a part of the Black Arts Initiative. So fast forward ahead 3 years, when I have to go back to the provost, by that time we had done 3 conferences. We had done all this teaching together. We'd done all this programming. We created this series called Black Arts in the City, where we actually took our students into the city to see Black art. And I said, okay, here's what we did with the seed money. So pony up again. And how are you going to say no to that? So the provost did pony up, but this time, the same amount of money, $150,000, but this time over 5 years. So you see how they did that. $150,000 for 3 years initially, but then another $150,000 over 5 years. So we got the same amount of money, but actually less per year. But what that did was it bought us more time to do even more things. And again, the strategy was to make sure that the BAI was a part of the DNA of the university. So that gave us an 8-year stretch of time to make sure that that happened. And it did. And so we pivoted from the Black Arts Initiative to the Black Arts Consortium because the idea was to partner with global institutions. So now we have connections in South Africa, the Bahamas, in Jamaica, in Puerto Rico, in London. And we also hope to build partnerships actually with Penn because a former colleague, Huey Copeland, is there now, so that we have this traffic of Black art that's both local and global. And those 8 years of building up the Black Arts Initiative did lead to the administration providing funding for a space, an actual office, a director's office, a conference room, and a little studio for visiting artists, an admin. So now we have actually some support, and we got to keep the graduate student. And I'm not the director anymore, which is great, because again, it was never meant to be built around me. I was just the facilitator. And so that's sort of a backstory of how something that started out as a white paper ended up being an initiative that then was transformed into now a consortium that has, brick and mortar and also has some stable funding. But it happened over time, it happened organically, and it happened because there was a lot of support, both from students and from faculty, but also from administration, who said, yeah, we'll throw some money at that and we'll see what happens, not understanding that we were determined to make sure that it was sustainable.
It's so great to hear these kind of case studies in a certain way of how, in some ways, perhaps from our perspective, we could maybe think of it as a tipping point where both of you sort of reach this tipping point wherein or after which the university opens up their embrace ever so much. I don't know if you see it that way, but I think one of the things it's helpful also, Patrick, as you're elaborating sort of resources and really the field of community-based organizations and community practitioners and community scholars as a kind of real resource. I wonder if yeah, you can speak to the kind of question of a tipping point and whether and how much that's a kind of constant struggle. But I also wanted to open up maybe this space of resources and to ask how each of you did navigate or continue to navigate the spheres of like boards of trustees, donors, like bodies of resources that are already attached to the university, whether to kind of galvanize or cohese their support, or just how that factors into your work.
It's been interesting to me being a dean now, because it's a little different than when I was a faculty member. So now I get to really see how the sausage is made and how development works. I'll just say briefly that as a faculty member, it was about me hustling to get foundation support and other kinds of support through non-Northwestern identified entities. And trying to get then the Black Arts Initiative as a priority for the school for my predecessor. And part of that was, volunteering to give a presentation about it before the school advisory board. As a dean, however, this is a bully pulpit, so I can steer donors in the direction of BAC. We have gotten one donor that was actually donation that was unsolicited. But now as dean, it's one of my priorities to, put all the things that the BAC has done in front of donors when we're thinking about a menu of things that they could fund. So it's shifted. And the final thing I'll say is, when I pitch things to central administration, because I'm even though I'm a dean, I'm still not central administration. I'm still a middle manager, basically. I'm constantly pitching BAC to upper administration for more support. So it's kind of a shifting landscape as I transition from faculty to dean, and even within the dean space, it's still tapping into my own donor list, but also managing up and keeping it on the radar.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in on that difficult question, but such an important one. Once you stop spending allocated seed money, but are tasked with raising money, then things get interesting. And I'll say, for me, in addition to some of the things that Patrick said, one of the hardest and yet also most important thing I thought around my work and my position was to try to organize multi-unit projects that would inspire multi-unit giving. And it's a harder road to hoe sometimes, because sometimes a university structure or personalities or whatever occasionally conspire to keep that it's often, when it comes to fundraising, this is where things get siloed again. This is even at a very interdisciplinary, porous, creative, innovative university, the structures incentivize silo thinking, if not when it comes to ideas, when it comes to things like infrastructure, staff hires, faculty allocations, and fundraising. And everyone reports about their unit, and it's almost as if they have their own GDP and work against that, et cetera. So a big thing was to try to build muscles for trusting and collaborating on multi-unit giving. So examples of things that we worked on that also helped people recognize the importance of collaboration were things like a multi-unit lecture series that funded contributions and speakers from different units, honoraria paid for, et cetera, funded the staffing apparatus to support it, lifting staff labor off of units, funded a beautiful, beautiful venue in which to house it that some units wouldn't necessarily have had access to, and then figuring out a proposal that funds each of the units that contribute to this. So that would be an example. Another example in this domain it's come up before is something like arts access. Patrick talked about getting students into the city to see actual performances, to see exhibitions. This has been a very big initiative of a lot of arts initiatives at other universities, including Chicago, very near you, as well as Columbia. Many all throughout the US have really put a lot of their arts initiative funding into arts access for students. But at Berkeley, what we initially started to realize was that every form was working on its own arts access program, its own program to get students to see music, to see theater, to see, and so once again, we started to put together projects that would allow one donor or a donor's contribution to help support access to the arts across all of the forms and across many, many different venues throughout the Bay Area. So that was another example when it was actually not logical for every unit to be working on fundraising for its own arts access program, but where everybody could feel helped by working together. Similar when it comes to space, we worked on a project where everyone needs, even if you're not in a film department, everyone needs access to cameras these days because documentation and video are part of so many art forms. So the theater department needs it, the dance department needs it, the film and media department needs it, the art practice department needs it. Everyone has partial resources to contribute. We worked on a project that's now called the Digital Media Lab, where all three, now four of those units work together on sustaining an infrastructure together to which a donor can contribute and know that they're helping four departments. So things like that, it's a heavy lift at the beginning, but it seemed really important lest these sort of, how did you put it? The sort of the sort of dispersed governance structure of universities gets at least mildly integrated for these moments. And if you can bring in money at those moments, I think people see the wisdom in working that way.
If I could just follow up on one thing that Shannon said at the end there. So I'm working on those kinds of I don't use death metaphors anymore. So I say, instead of kill two birds with one stone, I say feed two birds with one seed. So one of the ways I've been able to do that or attempt to do that is provide, as Shannon was saying, a platform for or incentivize departments to collaborate around one thing or another. But the other thing, again, as dean, I'm also reaching out to my colleagues in the other schools, arts and sciences in particular, and the Medill School of Journalism to collaborate on projects where there's natural synergy, or the McCormick School of Engineering. And so one way I've been able to break down some silos and also bring some fundraising together is partnering with the Medill School of Journalism on a new podcast center. Because again, our students and faculty in radio, television, film, and the faculty in Medill are very interested in this. So the dean of Medill is talking to his donors, I'm talking to my donors, and again, it will benefit not just my school, but 2 schools, which is significant. Again, bringing folks together, that's going to help everyone, not just the 2 schools, but the university.
I mean, in a way, what both of you are making so clear is the importance of inventorying, you know, who has what, who needs what, how can these goods and needs be consolidated, and how can we all be made aware of each other's resources, et cetera, on campus in order to create a more collective profile that can also generate collaboration, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really helpful to hear. I want to switch gears a little bit right now. And Patrick, this is something that you mentioned or that you alluded to earlier when you were talking about taking students into Chicago, collaborating with community-based organizations, right? You know, many universities are currently, sorry, I live on Broad Street. It's like drag racing all the time. I'm sure you hear it, but many universities are currently quite concerned with thinking through historic and entrenched issues such as racism, elitism, and the ways that they have engaged with the community, however we define that surrounds the space of the university. And, you know, both within the culture of the institution and then beyond, you know, in our case, the space of West Philadelphia, you know, there are challenges to building the kinds of relationships to do social justice work within and beyond campus. So I'm wondering if you can speak just a bit about how you see the arts creating space for interventions in that regard.
Yeah, for us, it has been, again, multi-tiered and multi-leveled. On the student side of things, because again, we're based in Evanston and it's seen as this sort of faraway space, our students also don't go into the city on their own a lot. So the Black Arts in the City program that's run through the Black Arts Consortium was one way that we could get our students into the city to see what was going on. But then we also created a internship program where our students, both undergrad and grad, actually do internships at Black arts organizations in the city. This was particularly helpful during COVID, for instance, when those institutions were having financial difficulties. Access to archives, for instance, weren't as available as before. So a number of our graduate students and undergraduates worked with those institutions to help organize their archives. This was particularly true with the DeSable Museum, but also other institutions. So we also reached out to a number of organizations and basically just said, do you need help? And they said yes. So what that did was it made Northwestern accessible to institutions that aren't typically accessible to Northwestern. And it made us better partners because we do have a presence in the city. We have a downtown campus that houses our med school and our law school, but also now we have an arts foothold down there in a building. We just opened up a black box theater in our downtown space and just had our first public performance there. So we're, and that's where the Black Arts Consortium is housed as well, in that building. So that gives us an opportunity to do more engaging with those institutions. We're also providing, again, this was during COVID, we provided micro grants to local artists. So instead of, for instance, giving $40,000 to one artist in residence, we gave out like 10 or 15 $5,000 micro grants for artists who were particularly hit by COVID. Their income dried up, and they could buy supplies with it. They could hire some assistants, whatever they wanted to use the funds for. And again, that was targeted. That was targeted to Chicago artists in particular, who were hit by COVID, and we want to continue doing that kind of outreach, because Northwestern, like Penn, is a very wealthy institution, and we want to make sure that we are being good neighbors, but also providing opportunities to artists and arts institutions that don't have the kind of wealth, or quite frankly, don't have the kind of clout or access that Northwestern does. And so through these various programs, we've been able to do a little bit of that. And moving forward through the Black Arts Consortium, what we want to do is provide opportunities for our students to actually go to institutions around the world. So there's these exchanges where our students go there, and they can send students here. That's sort of the pipe dream once we're a little past COVID, to do more of that, and even faculty.
Just chime in a little bit about the community engagement element. Just maybe sort of some higher level things to remember. Well, that first of all, the arts are a vehicle by which the university can have a community engaged profile. So if you, depending on what is playing background to who's foreground, just to remember, if that is its own initiative for the university to come to terms with its own place in its community, just to remember the incredible role that the arts have, the capacities that the arts have for actualizing that. Or another way to think about it is that the universe is the holy trinity of the university as promoting research, teaching, and service. And if service is both internal to the campus, but also external to our world, that this is a prime place for the arts to be active. That doesn't mean, of course, that we don't have deep racist histories that all of our arts industries and professions have to reckon with, and that we want to build a culture of students who actually are part of the force of dismantling and rebuilding what those professions are, from within Berkeley. Even some of the most effective leaders around the decolonization of theater. There've been a number of initiatives around that have come from Berkeley students in the leadership. So just to remember that the real importance of that. When it comes to us also, there was a really important thing, I think, from my office to recognize the range of ways that the arts were already promoting community engagement, and that the arts as a kind of public service were already happening in lots of different places that, again, because they were dispersed around campus, weren't aware of each other, weren't making use of shared resources, and also weren't elevated to the top of the menu when it came to funding and donor interest. So this also goes, I think, to your earlier point, Deborah, about inventory, about taking inventory, that just being charged to take the inventory creates a situation where people can get out of this mindset of an austerity mindset of how will our art in public schools program, it's called CREATE, run by the Public Service Center, how will it have materials when our public schools don't have money for materials? You know, and they're all struggling there on their own, or the art practice department is also thinking about how will it work on its engagement with local public schools. And you sort of say, at one moment when you take the inventory, you can stop, that can get people out of an austerity model and into like a chocolate and peanut butter situation, where by actually putting these together, they can solve each other's problems and build something bigger. Another thing I think about for us around arts, around community engagement, is the importance of turning what sometimes start as maybe one-off relationships or projects, somebody's pet project or something works for 1 year, and to actually establish long-term relationships with institutions, with organizations, with local community organizations, so that they know that this university, which mine might not be as wealthy as the two of yours, but it's a behemoth of the place, is in it for the long haul, not here just for one class, but that we start to understand the long-term issues, the histories and the forward mission of a range of organizations, and build trust with the staff of different community organizations, so that we know that the next year when this class is happening, or this might, or we have a sense of how these organizations might have been affected by COVID. We also find that once we have a huge network of community arts organizations of different sorts, that they tend to be the same organizations to which we turn to for arts access. Can we bring a bunch of students to this poetry reading or this exhibition? They're sometimes the same organizations to which we turn, as Patrick said, toward internships or volunteer opportunities. So you have this sort of network that you're hopefully feeding and tapping in a virtuous circle, again, because you have a longer term relationship with the individual staff and the organization. So just a few thoughts just to amplify a bit on some of the things Patrick said. And we could get into a bit of a more dialogic mode too. I don't know if you agree, Patrick. We don't
I know that. Well,
have to alternate monologues.
I know, it's true. It's true. We're all like,
Sure.
you know, alternating. Now, Deb, now, Sharon. Clearly, we could go on for hours and hours, actually, dialogically, and it would be amazing. And hopefully, and in the future, we'll be able to continue that. At the moment, I'll invite those who are watching the webinar to certainly put in questions if you have any. We have just 5 or 10 minutes for questions. We had some that came in prior to tonight. So I'm just going to pick from that. You've answered most of them, but there's one that maybe you can kind of speak to, which the question reads, given that students have so many competing priorities for their time and attention, what are some of the ways that institutions can ease the friction that prevents them from participating in arts-related activities? And then I think adjacent to that, arts-related activities that involve the local community as well. So you've talked about that, many lines that you both have worked on for students' participation, but how do you kind of manage the fact that they are pulled in 1,000 directions?
The lesson I learned is don't manage them. You know, we had a tough time early on when we were the Black Arts Initiative, getting undergraduates in particular to come to any of our events. But there's nothing that can get students out more, except for pizza, than if you offer them support for their own projects. So what we did was 2 things. We invited undergraduates, members on the board, on the advisory board, so that they were at the table when the programming for the BAC was being done. But we also set aside funding for their own things. 2 of those things were a film series that they curated themselves And they wanted our support, ours meaning faculty support, in bringing in speakers who would lead a Q&A after the screenings. The other thing we set aside money for was their own performance festival that they curated, they produced, we just gave them money. And what we found is their network is much more extensive than ours in terms of reaching students. So the fact that we had that the event was sponsored by BAC meant that when we sponsored other things that were not theirs, that we got more students to show up. So it was not trying to, browbeat them, because one of our strategies initially was having those of us who were teaching make the BAC programming a requirement, or extra credit. But even that wasn't working. But as soon as we sort of shifted to focusing on allowing them to do what they wanted and just giving them resources, that made all the difference.
Shannon,
Yeah, I agree with Patrick. That also is about the come bearing gifts idea. And it can be a relatively small gift, especially, sometimes for undergrads, incredible what they can do. That also speaks to another thing that I know we had talked about in preparing for this dialogue about the role of student groups, student clubs in the arts, and different kinds of grants, or even incentivizing more than one student club to work together on a project. All of those things, I think, can help help with the buy-in factor, as well as the time management factor that you're bringing up, Sharon. The other thing I think also is when you are supporting faculty, for instance, we had a set of creative discovery pedagogy grants where faculty from every single department, and certainly every single college on campus, from engineering, natural resources, journalism, microcell biology, as well as the arts, all had faculty who are interested in these creative pedagogy grants that then allowed them to create a place within their syllabi to do something that a student might have been pining to do outside of the class. And now they could get credit for it. I think that's another thing. I think it can work both ways, about finding ways within existent unit-bearing courses to insert a project, as well as to, on the reverse, create structures. And we even create course numbers to give students units for doing the, quote, extracurricular, co-curricular activity that they wanted to do anyway, so that they don't have the sense that they are somehow. Similarly with their work study, some who have work study appointments, we also gathered, because we have 32% of our students are Pell Grant recipients. They all are negotiating multiple jobs. There tremendous economic precarity amongst some students, including food insecurity, et cetera. So when it is incredibly important to make sure that nobody perceives the arts to be something only for the wealthy kids or for middle-class kids. And so another big thing that we said, we did an inventory of all of the work study positions around campus that were arts related, and there's hundreds of them, and that to tell them that you are building your arts leadership skills when you're working on an archive at Berkeley Art Museum, that you're building your arts leadership skills when you're doing a graphic design poster for this other department, and more and on. But just to elevate, to recast some of the things that were of necessity taking up the attention of students, and reminding them that there was an arts component to it. That's also another strategy.
So I think if we don't have other burning questions from the webinar audience, okay, one last question. Well, this is something that you've touched on, but we have a question that just came in around, and then we'll have this be our last question, and then we'll toast you off. If you have done work helping students with postgraduate professional career development, career access, access to arts related careers?
I'll just say something that I started to say a bit about how we turn to some of the immediate organizations routinely for internships and placements and volunteer opportunities. Along with that, for instance, we have a yearly gathering called a Creative Careers. I think we have different names for it every year, but it's, you know, a party, a meet and greet. It was on Zoom last year. That we started and evolved, that was also very sort of grassroots, with people from everything from small to mid-sized venues, arts organizations to Pixar and industry coming together to talk to students. And then we started to evolve it ourselves, and then we collaborated with our career center and then locked into their systems, including a system that perhaps Northwestern's Career Center and Penn's Career Center has. It's used in most universities, called Handshake. It's a digital mechanism for placing and for having students find out about things. But if we could tag and help curate direct access between to those kinds of placements, that's what we ended up doing. So there were different ways that, on the one hand, we were bringing knowledge of a different network, and the Career Center was bringing knowledge, you know, industry standards about how to place students in careers after, you know, post-graduation, and to make sure that the two of us, those headspaces, were working together.
Yeah, we have two things that we're doing. It's called EPICS, External Programs, Internships, and Career Services. And EPICS, we're instituting this year a senior capstone course that actually provides students more of a nuts and bolts transition from being a student to industry, whatever that industry might be. And we're actually engaging alums who are in industry to come back and do workshops and lectures, but also providing some co-curricular funding to actually take students to, you know, to LA or to New York, to maybe sit in on a pitch or to understand how, what it means to be a showrunner, and so on and so forth. So we're doing that. And that's been great because we have a lot of alumni in LA in particular who are chomping at the bit to be engaged. And so this was an easy ask for them. The other thing is, and it sort of gets at that question in a different way. We have a number of MFA programs at Northwestern, and until last week, all of them had different funding models. You know, some of them had full funding, some of them had partial funding, and some of them were revenue generating. And as an artist myself, I thought it was unethical to have artists graduating into debt. And so it was a key part of my ask to central administration from the moment I became dean is to get funding to equalize all of our MFA programs so that all of them would be fully funded. And so now all of our MFA programs are fully funded programs, which I think will be transformative and ultimately will make us more competitive and not have artists graduating into debt.
That is such an amazing sort of accomplishment to end with. And I think one of the things that also is linking, we so deeply appreciate your expertise and your experiences and you sharing them with us. And I think this question also that came up at the end and the ways that your expansive answer is also, in my experience, it's often faculty who are making these professional development, faculty artists in particular, making these professional development and career points of contact for students as well. So in some ways, what you offer us in terms of a real landscape of integrated support and integrated sort of work and both the work of practice, the work of scholarship, and the work of administrative and administrative infrastructure building is really wonderful, generous, and inspiring. So thank you, Shannon and Patrick, to both of you. Deb, do you want to I'll pass it off to you to.
Well, sure. I just want to echo Sharon and send you thanks for raising so many important issues that I think, will be really productive for us moving forward, and to pass it back to John, who I think has some closing remarks. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Deb. I just want to echo that and thank everyone that was on the panel today, especially our guests, E. Patrick Johnson and Shannon Jackson, but also our moderators, Deborah Thomas and Sharon Hayes. And a special thanks to all of you that joined us today.
And to all of you who joined us, please keep an eye out, because I think it's really wonderful if we can work together to kind of talk through, share, start to do some inventory building and to move this work forward. So please come back.
Yes, and we will be sending a follow-up email to everyone with the link to this recording, and we have plans to continue this series later this year. So please visit sacsarts.org, sign up for our updates there, and we'll let you know about future programming. But thank you again for your support for the arts and for working with us to advance artists and creative expression. Good night.
Thank you for
Bye,
including us.
everybody. Thank
Bye.
you.